I know what you're thinking.
Know what? I just said the house is really beautiful.
Don't dodge it. This isn't your dream.
But I'm not the only one allowed to dream. The early morning breeze swept across the slopes of Windermere Hill, carrying the scent of pine wood and freshly cut stone. At the peak of that hill, a modern glass villa rose from the wild landscape like a declaration of will and ambition, not belonging to anyone else but Jessica Monroe, a 38-year-old woman from Seattle who had spent nearly 20 years of her life breaking through every limit, every prejudice, and every form of dismissal in a construction industry long dominated by men. No one ever thought a petite brunette who once worked as a site cleaner would rise to become the owner of a respected real estate development firm, but Jessica wasn't here to ask permission. She was here to make a statement. At the age of 20, while many chose safer paths, Jessica chose concrete, blueprints, and sleepless nights just to keep up with evening technical classes. While her peers were dating or traveling, she was laying bricks, putting up walls, and learning how to read every zoning line engineers sped through like a windstorm. They used to laugh. That girl thinks she'll run a project one day? That's cute. But she didn't laugh. She logged every word and used them as fuel. By 30, Jessica was a project manager, but her success didn't come from luck. It came from those rainy days she still showed up to inspect the foundation, from fierce debates with investors who wanted to cut corners with cheap materials, and from the nights she slept on a container floor because there wasn't time to go home. Her grit wasn't taught in textbooks. It was forged through doubt and the constant need to prove herself. Windermere Hill was once nothing but a dry patch of land 40 minutes outside Denver. No one gave it a second thought, except Jessica. Where others saw a dusty dirt road leading up a barren slope, she saw glass corridors, an infinity pool overlooking the valley, and sunlight dancing across window panes. It wasn't just a house. It was the finale to years of rejection. Jessica sold nearly everything to begin the project. She didn't own a fancy car or a flashy condo, only sketches, stubborn resolve, and an unshakable vision. Friends worried. Family called her a dreamer. But she didn't want to live a half-life just to avoid judgment. She wanted to live on purpose, to define success on her own terms. Every brick in that house, every west-facing window frame carried her touch. No one else chose the gray oak wood for the ceiling. No one else flew to Vermont to handpick the granite for the countertops. And no one else took responsibility when the bank denied the final loan, except Jessica, who mortgaged nearly all her assets just to keep building. On completion day, when engineers and contractors clapped in unison, Jessica didn't cry. She simply looked into the horizon, where golden light shimmered across the valley, and thought, I did it. Not with luck, not inheritance, but with my own hands. Jessica's story isn't just about a house. It's living proof of one principle. Success doesn't belong to those waiting to be given a chance. It belongs to those who build it themselves. When the world told her she was too risky, she responded with action. When people called her stubborn, she quietly hit her targets. And when society said women don't belong in construction, she built a dream too big for any stereotype to contain. Jessica proved that no one has to settle for the appropriate place if they dare to choose the place they truly deserve. The house on Windermere Hill stands as a bold declaration. Women can design the blueprint of their own lives, not just to survive, but to inspire. And if you've ever been told your dreams are too far-fetched, remember what Jessica always holds close to her heart. No one has the right to extinguish the light you lit with your own hands. Just one day after officially completing the villa on Windermere Hill, Jessica Monroe had already planned her dream housewarming party, a warm gathering reserved only for those who had truly walked beside her through nearly 2 decades. She had booked her favorite French restaurant, hired a professional event team, and even prepared a playlist tailored to each hour's lighting, everything to mark a new chapter in her life. But no one warned her that this new chapter would begin with a stinging slap. That morning, as Jessica drove home to do one final check before the party, her mood was light as air. She planned to inspect every corner of the yard, replace a few bouquets in the foyer, and maybe sit on the porch for a few minutes sipping peppermint tea, breathing in the peace she had finally earned. But then, as she placed the key into the lock, she heard laughter from inside. That laugh was far too familiar, a soft tone laced with entitlement. It was Emily, her sister, the one who had once told her, "You have no taste," and "Don't overdo this house stuff." Jessica opened the door and stepped inside. The air immediately felt suffocating. Emily was standing in the grand foyer beside a blonde woman holding what appeared to be an event layout. "This backyard is perfect for the tent," Emily laughed loudly. "Told you, this place is made for my wedding." Jessica froze, the words sounding unreal. She interrupted, her voice low and firm. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Her sister turned, smiling as if she'd won the lottery. "Oh, didn't you hear? Mom and Dad said they're gifting me this house as a wedding present. You don't need it. You live alone." Jessica's heart seemed to stop. Every brick, every blueprint, all those sleepless nights and drops of sweat poured into this project, now reduced to a wedding gift. She looked around. No one in the house seemed surprised by her presence. They acted as if she was the intruder. When her parents walked in through the back door without even knocking, Jessica knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan, a long one. "You should understand, Jess," her mother said sweetly, with that manipulative tone she knew too well. "Emily's starting a family. She needs stability. And you can always build another one. It's not that hard for you." That sentence lit the fire that had been smoldering inside Jessica for years. They had never asked how she felt, never acknowledged her effort, only saw her as a machine that produced results for others to use as they pleased. No one asked permission. No one even thought to. They had decided on their own that her life's greatest accomplishment was up for grabs. Memories flooded back like cold water. The times Emily made mistakes and was forgiven, while Jessica got blamed. The years she paid her own tuition while her sister was financially supported. Now, they were reenacting the same pattern. Only this time, the cost was her entire life. But Jessica was no longer the little girl crying in the kitchen corner. She no longer endured in silence. Standing in the very foyer she had built, she stood tall, looked each of them in the eye, and said, without shouting, "Everyone, out of my house, now." The room fell silent. Emily's mouth hung open. Her father stepped forward, voice icy. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's just one house. Sacrificing it for family? Is that really such a big deal?" Jessica let out a bitter laugh, a dry, cutting sound. She pointed to the wall where her name was engraved. "This isn't just a house. It's proof of everything I've given up, and I won't let anyone, not even family, take it because they want a dream wedding." In that moment, she wasn't just protecting a piece of real estate. She was defending her voice. Finally, without fear of being labeled cold-hearted, they left. No one said goodbye. Her mother wiped away tears. Emily shot a glare sharp enough to pierce glass. But Jessica didn't flinch. She knew this wasn't over. There would be phone calls, accusations, even hatred. But she also knew something far more important. The silence that had lasted for years. It was time to break it. And this time, she would be the one writing the next chapter, in her own voice. As soon as the door closed behind Emily and her parents, Jessica Monroe leaned against the wall, her hands still trembling slightly. The atmosphere in the villa, once built with all her love and hope, was now tainted with the scent of betrayal. She closed her eyes, not to cry, but to breathe, deeply. It had been a long time since she allowed herself to pause. Anger and disappointment swirled inside her like a storm. But beneath it all, something else rose up, a will to protect. And this time, Jessica wouldn't let everything slip through her fingers like before. Without hesitation, she opened her laptop on the dining table where a few fresh bouquets still sat, waiting to be arranged. She opened every file: construction contracts, permits from the Department of Building, payment invoices, all bearing the name Jessica Monroe. She saved each one to an external hard drive, then backed them up again to the cloud. Every piece of evidence was clear. This wasn't just her home. This was a legally established asset she had built with her own hands. She immediately called David, the attorney who had been with her since the start of the project. "David, I need hard copies of all ownership documents, and I want to initiate procedures to protect the property, both legally and physically, right away." David's voice was deep and decisive. "I understand. You're dealing with a covert takeover. We'll move fast." That same day, Jessica contacted a security firm and requested all the locks be changed, A new surveillance system with facial recognition and remote alerts be installed. Every entry and exit would be recorded. She no longer had blind faith in the word family, not after what had just happened. That afternoon, the messages began to pour in. From Aunt Lana, who hadn't contacted her in 4 years, then Uncle Derek, even distant relatives from Florida, ones who once mistakenly sent her birthday wishes meant for someone else. They all carried the same refrain: family is everything. Your sister just wants a place to start her life. You're being selfish clinging to one house. Only a stone-hearted person wouldn't forgive blood. Jessica read each line calmly. Not a single one of them asked what had happened. No one cared about what she had endured to build this house. To them, her pain and hard work never mattered as much as someone else's comfort. She put down her phone. On the screen, unread messages continued flooding in, but she didn't open them. Instead, she poured a cup of ginger tea and sat staring out at the backyard, where Emily had once pointed and said, "Perfect spot for a wedding tent." Now, under the soft light of late afternoon, it had returned to its true form, a peaceful space, an extension of the dream Jessica had fought so hard to preserve. That evening, David sent a confirmation email. All documents were prepared, along with a draft restraining order if needed. "If they try to cross the line again," he wrote, "we have full legal grounds to act." Jessica closed her eyes for a moment. She knew this wasn't just about a ruined party or a few offensive words. This was a battle for the right to hold on to the fruits of her labor, for her dignity, and for the boundary between love and exploitation. She used to fear losing her family. But now, what scared her more was losing herself trying to please people who never truly listened. The next day, as the installation team arrived to set up the smart security cameras, one of the younger workers remarked, "This place looks like it came straight out of a magazine. Can't believe the designer is just you." Jessica simply smiled and nodded. Sometimes you have to build your own safe space, because not everyone understands what boundaries mean. She didn't need praise. She only needed respect. And now she had drawn that line, clear, firm, and not easily crossed. And in that moment, amidst the sound of drills, the morning bird song, and sunlight spilling across the tiled floor, Jessica Monroe knew this battle had just begun. But this time, she had weapons. 3 weeks after Jessica Monroe tightened security around the villa on Windermere Hill, life seemed temporarily calm. She returned to her work designing a sustainable housing project in northern Colorado and began allowing herself mornings without checking her phone in a state of constant alert. But that piece was just a thin layer of ice over a quietly boiling lake. And then the masks began to fall, one by one. Wednesday afternoon, while reviewing interior designs with her team over Zoom, the doorbell rang. On the surveillance screen appeared an image that made Jessica freeze: Brandon Ellis, Emily's fiancé. They had only shaken hands once, at the engagement party Jessica had been pressured by her family to attend. Back then, he had seemed polite, slightly distant, and clearly uninterested in being caught in the Monroe family drama. She opened the door, keeping a proper distance. Brandon stood there in a slightly wrinkled suit, holding a stack of documents. His face was tense, his eyes weary, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Sorry for showing up unannounced, but I don't know who else to trust anymore," he said, his voice hoarse like sand. Jessica led him into the living room. They sat across from each other, separated only by a marble coffee table she had personally selected from Italy. Brandon placed the documents on the table like evidence before a judge. "Emily said this house was hers, that your parents put it under their names for tax reasons," he spoke slowly. "I believed her. But after the housewarming party, things started to feel off." Jessica didn't respond. She waited. She avoided questions about the ownership papers. "Recently, I noticed multiple withdrawals from our joint account, and then a company name, Monroe Luxury Estates, that I've never heard of." His hands trembled as he handed her a stack of printed social media posts. Emily, dressed in business attire, stood in front of the villa holding architectural drawings. The caption read, "One of my debut designs. Reserve now for early bird benefits." Each photo was a stab, not because she was being deceived, but because the deceiver was the one who once called her sister. "You know she's impersonating me?" Jessica asked, her voice colder than intended. Brandon nodded. And I think that's just the surface. She's using personal information to apply for loans. Your parents' signatures are on some of them. I I think they know. A heavy silence fell, as heavy as stone. Jessica stood, walked to her filing cabinet, and pulled out a silver USB. She handed it to Brandon. This has all the proof of ownership, design, and investment. I'll send it to my lawyer. If Emily is defrauding not only me, but investors as well, she'll face the law. Brandon looked at her, a mix of gratitude and pain in his eyes. I'm about to break off the engagement, but I still want to do what's right. As he left, carrying the documents like a whistleblower stepping out of the dark, Jessica returned inside and opened her laptop. She sent an urgent email to David. Signs of fraud. Emily is impersonating me to raise illegal investments. Prepare the case. That night, she couldn't sleep. The layers of trust inside her, once slowly cracking, had now completely collapsed. This wasn't just family betrayal, it was premeditated crime. Emily didn't just want the house. She wanted Jessica's name, her reputation, and the career she had built over nearly 2 decades of blood, sweat, and tears. The next morning, her phone rang. A message from the security system. Unusual movement detected in living room. Face recognition, Emily Monroe. Jessica opened the camera feed. Emily, holding an iPad, was leading a group of 7 people in suits, investors apparently. As you can see, this is the first model in the Monroe Luxury Estates series, designed entirely by me. Jessica didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and called the police, her voice sharp as a blade. I'm reporting a case of unlawful entry and impersonation on private property. A restraining order is in effect. Address, 14 Windermere Crest, Colorado. 12 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up to the gate. The investors began to realize the truth as they watched Emily being handcuffed, tears streaming down her face. She screamed, "This is a misunderstanding. This is my family." Jessica stepped outside, holding a copy of the property deed. Number, this is my house. And you just broke the law. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. There was only a calm force of a woman who had endured enough and would let no one cross the line again. The legal battle was ahead, but now all masks had fallen, and Jessica Monroe, once dismissed as the girl too stubborn to love, was now ready to defend both her name and justice to the very end. 3 days after Emily's blatant intrusion with a group of fake investors, Jessica Monroe received a call from the Denver Police Department requesting her assistance in the investigation. The meeting took place in a quiet briefing room. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just a heavy atmosphere and truths being uncovered like puzzle pieces of a dark picture. Detective Louise Campbell, the lead investigator, placed a thick file in front of her along with a laptop displaying a map of bank transactions. His tone wasn't harsh, but each word was precise. Ms. Jessica, we believe your sister's actions weren't impulsive. We're looking at an organized fraud scheme. Jessica clenched her hands under the table. She nodded, unsurprised. She had suspected this from the moment she saw Emily standing in her home, lying without the slightest hesitation. Detective Campbell continued, pointing at the screen. Transfers into the account under the company name Monroe Luxury Estates have reached $2.2 million. The funds came from 6 different states. Most were private investors. She promised a 25% return within 6 months. Jessica remained silent. Every number on the screen felt like the final nail in the coffin of what little trust she had left in her family. But it gets worse, Campbell said, locking eyes with her. We found your parents' signatures on multiple loan applications and guaranteed documents for Emily. No less than $750,000 was signed under Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Carol Monroe. It was a deep cut to her chest. Jessica felt as if someone had dragged out her entire past and crushed every memory. The times she helped her parents fix the roof, paid Emily's tuition, or quietly covered hospital bills when her father broke his leg, all now sat next to legal documents bearing their signatures, against her. Do you know your parents could be considered accomplices? Campbell asked, his tone lowering. If they signed knowing the company was fake, we could press charges. Jessica didn't answer right away. She stared at the line. Daniel Monroe, signature verified. All illusions had collapsed. Hours later, she returned to the villa exhausted. The moment she set her bag on the floor, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. Lisa, please, think of the baby in Emily's belly. She's 3 months pregnant. The doctor says emotional distress could affect the fetus. Don't sue her. Please. Jessica stood still, her eyes wide but empty, just as she had expected. There was no apology, no confession, no accountability. They were once again using emotions as a weapon, this time shielding adult wrongdoing behind an innocent child. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Instead, she opened her laptop and created a new folder: Lawsuit, Family Fraud 2025. Each file was gathered: screenshots, bank statements, Brandon's testimony, property ownership records, security footage from the day Emily broke in. She sent it all to David with a brief note: proceed with lawsuit, impersonation, trespassing, and financial fraud. No delays. The next day, at the preliminary hearing at Denver County Court, Emily appeared with a slightly swollen belly, hands cuffed in front. Her once golden hair was hastily tied up, and her eyes no longer carried fake confidence. Behind her were Jessica's parents, pale-faced, eyes avoiding hers. The judge asked a simple question: Ms. Jessica Monroe, do you confirm that you never authorized the defendant to use your personal information, assets, or reputation to solicit investments? Jessica stood, eyes unblinking. Never. Not once. When the hearing ended, Emily's attorney still tried to win sympathy. My client is a pregnant woman, a first-time entrepreneur, naive, and without malicious intent. David responded coldly: ignorance is not a shield for defrauding over $2 million and forging high-level legal identities. Leaving the courthouse, Jessica didn't look back. She knew behind her, her mother was calling softly, as if trying to salvage something long shattered. But she didn't stop. On the way home, as the car wound through the hills where wind whispered through rows of pine trees like the voice of integrity, Jessica thought only one thing: sometimes loss isn't about losing family. It's about losing the illusion that they ever truly were family. And amidst that collapse, she chose to hold on to the one thing still intact: the truth. 3 weeks after the hearing, the atmosphere in the villa on Windermere Hill gradually returned to its usual quiet. The wind still swept through the wide glass windows, reflecting the brilliant sky onto the light-colored wooden floor that Jessica Monroe had chosen herself 3 years ago. But this time, the silence was no longer a sign of peace. It was the conclusion of a chapter of survival. The judge had made the ruling. Emily was detained awaiting trial with charges including financial fraud, identity theft, and unlawful trespassing. Jessica's parents, Daniel and Carol, were sentenced to 3 years of probation and ordered to repay $150,000 in civil penalties for co-signing loans under false pretenses, although there wasn't enough evidence to convict them of criminal conspiracy. Jessica didn't celebrate. She didn't drink wine, nor did she speak on television like a few media outlets had requested. She did only one thing: stepped into the backyard and sat on the bench beside the lavender beds. The breeze blew gently, carrying the soft scent of herbs like a quiet message that every storm has its end. But inside her, there was a strange emptiness. Yes, justice had spoken. She had won. But the person she once called sister, and the ones who used to hold her hand on the way to school, now stood on the side of darkness. The outside world, however, saw it differently. After the case was made public in the press, the website for Jessica's company, Monroe and Hartman Development, saw a dramatic spike in traffic. People didn't come to scrutinize, but to support. Messages from partners, former clients, and female architecture students poured in, all echoing the same sentiment: you did the right thing. And it was that realization that helped her understand: true failure is when we stay silent and allow wrong to continue. A week later, she accepted an invitation to speak at the Women in Architecture Leadership Forum, a stage she once dreamed of when starting out in the profession. On stage at the conference, Jessica didn't talk about success or construction techniques. She told a story about a house claimed by family without her consent, about a sister who used her reputation for personal gain, and about learning to draw boundaries, even with the people we once loved. She ended with a sentence that left the whole auditorium silent. Don't teach your daughters to always forgive. Teach them how to protect themselves, and to walk away when someone sees their kindness as something to exploit. The speech was shared across professional forums and even featured on a financial platform. But what touched Jessica most was an email from a young woman who wrote, "You saved me from quitting this profession. Now I know I need to choose again. Not out of anger, but because I deserve a path of my own making." Those words brought Jessica to tears for the first time in this entire journey. And then she made a decision to turn the villa, once a battlefield, into a place of healing. Jessica opened the doors of the villa to a new event, New Foundations, a fundraising evening for female architecture students, especially those without family support. She invited architects, investors, and those who had stood by her during her hardest years. The party had no expensive champagne or grand orchestra, only soft lights, background jazz, and real stories. Brandon also came, not as Emily's former fiancé, but as someone who chose to stand on the right side. He handed Jessica an envelope, a quiet donation to the fund, along with a note that read, "Thank you for not staying silent." She smiled, saying nothing, because some things only need to be felt with kindness. That night when the guests had gone, Jessica stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down at the valley where the city lights sparkled like millions of living dreams. She sipped a cup of chamomile tea and asked herself, if I had stayed silent that day, would everything have remained peaceful? The answer came in the wind. No. It would have just meant the darkness claimed one more home. She placed her hand on the wooden railing, feeling it as solid as her heart now. The villa was no longer just a piece of property. It was a legacy of resilience, the result of daring to say enough when the world told her to give in. And now, Jessica Monroe was no longer just a survivor. She was someone who rebuilt from ruin, with her own hands, her heart, and a faith that could never be stolen. 6 months after Jessica Monroe officially rose from the deepest wounds of her life, the villa on Windermere Hill was no longer a healing scar. It had become the beating heart of a new chapter, a chapter she held the pen to, written with hands that once trembled from betrayal, now steadier than any steel-reinforced design. That autumn, the Everlight Villas project, a line of eco-housing for single mothers, was approved for construction by local authorities. In an office filled with blueprints and technical diagrams, Jessica held a cup of hot coffee, gazing at the map of land stretched out before her. On the wall, a newly engraved quote read, "Success is yours. Don't let anyone steal your light." She no longer stepped back because of the past, no longer feared the names that once sent chills down her spine. Now she turned pain into power. The cruelty of her family didn't break her. It helped her see a truth. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. One early winter morning, Jessica found a cream-colored envelope in the mailbox. No sender, just a simple name, Jessica Monroe. The handwriting was soft and slanted, as if written in a hurry, yet full of emotion. She knew that handwriting. She knew it too well. Inside, Emily wrote from the Women's Correctional Facility in Colorado. She announced she had given birth to a baby girl, an innocent soul born into the web of lies Emily herself had spun. She spoke of fear, of the first time in her life she truly wanted to become a worthy mother, and of the nights she cried alone in the infirmary when no one called or wrote anymore. I don't expect you to forgive me. I only hope that one day my daughter will know you were the first in our family to stand up and to not forgive, so others would know they were wrong. Jessica folded the letter without shedding a tear. No more anger, but also none of the emotion that had once stirred in her chest. She placed it in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, the place where she kept things that should be remembered, but didn't need to be relived. Weeks later, during a lecture for architecture students at the University of Denver, Jessica was asked by a young woman, "Did you ever forgive them?" She paused for a few seconds, then replied, "Forgiveness isn't the ending. Sometimes it's just giving yourself permission to move on without carrying those who hurt you." The entire auditorium fell silent before erupting in a long round of applause. But Jessica didn't smile like a victor. She only bowed her head gently, as if to confirm that, in the end, she had truly healed herself. Success didn't come from praise or applause. To Jessica, success was being able to run a meeting without trembling from memory. It was seeing light in the eyes of women who once believed they were society's burden, now standing in front of their new homes, holding keys and smiling for real. It was living without waiting for anyone's approval of her life. The villa on Windermere Hill had now become a place where she hosted seminars, welcomed international partners, and occasionally, just occasionally, opened it for peaceful afternoon tea with Sarah, her one lifelong friend who never turned away. One late year evening, as the city lights below lit up like an artificial galaxy, Sarah stood beside Jessica on the balcony. Do you ever think, if you'd stayed silent that day, things would have been easier? Jessica tightened her grip on the wine glass and smiled. Yes, but then I wouldn't be myself anymore. And the scariest thing isn't being hurt by others. It's not daring to stand up for yourself. The wind passed over the dried lavender garden, carrying a gentle scent like memories no longer sharp. Jessica looked out toward the distance, where the Everlight Villas project was beginning its first construction phase. Not all wounds need to fully heal for us to keep living. Some scars are meant to stay, to remind us that light isn't something given by others, but something we must protect, every day, with a heart that knows its worth. And so, Jessica Monroe wasn't just the architect of the Windermere Villa. She was the designer of her own life, rebuilt from ruin, from darkness, and from the choice to never bow down to anyone again.